Lydia runs board meetings with the intensity of a parliamentary debate and once wrote a 6-page motion about proper mailbox flag etiquette, complete with photographic evidence of violations and a proposed fine structure. She has been HOA president for 7 consecutive years, running unopposed because anyone who considered challenging her would mysteriously receive a flurry of violation notices for things like unapproved window treatments or aggressive landscaping choices. While I was traveling for 3 months on a product launch in Singapore, Lydia decided to manage a landscaping project along what she called my rear easement. When I returned home exhausted from international flights, I found a brand new cul-de-sac, stamped concrete sidewalks with decorative borders, street lamps that looked like they belonged in a resort, and 9 tiny houses arranged like a Pinterest board come to life. Each cottage had a small yard, a mailbox with a Birch Haven logo, and what appeared to be professionally installed landscaping. The story just adjusted itself around me without my permission. Lydia knocked on my door with a gift basket and cheerfully explained that the rear half-acre was community-adjacent land. She handed me a courtesy notice stating that my unused slope had been activated for neighborhood vibrancy. She had already leased out all 9 cottages to approved residents on month-to-month rental contracts. She had even installed a keypad gate at the entrance. The only problem was that the gate locked from my side of the property line. When I politely disagreed with her interpretation of property boundaries, Lydia's smile disappeared and her tone shifted to pure menace. I started receiving violation letters for things like grass envy, hostile fencing posture, and failure to embrace community densification. Each letter arrived in the HOA's official cream-colored envelopes with the Cypress Hollow logo embossed on the front. The grass envy citation claimed my lawn was too green compared to my neighbors, creating unfair aesthetic pressure. The hostile fencing posture alleged that my existing privacy fence, which had been there when I bought the property, now cast intimidating shadows over the new cottages. The board announced that I owed a harmonization assessment of $24,000 for sidewalks I had never requested or approved. When I called to dispute the assessment, the board secretary told me with artificial sweetness that the vote had been unanimous and the payment was due in 30 days. At night, clipboard-wielding patrols paced along my fence line. I would hear footsteps and see flashlight beams scanning my yard. One evening, I caught 3 board members taking photographs of my recycling bins, measuring the distance from my property line with a tape measure, and making notes on official-looking forms. At night, clipboard-wielding patrols paced along my fence line. One of Lydia's lieutenants, a man named Derek, who wore a high-visibility vest and a body camera mounted on his chest like he was conducting a police investigation, whispered through the fence slats with a smug tone. "You cannot fight progress, Evan. This is about the greater good of Cypress Hollow." I kept my voice calm and measured, even though my heart was pounding. "It's my land," I replied simply. He winked at me like a budget action movie villain and said with absolute confidence, "Not according to the map." Then he tapped his clipboard twice against the fence and walked away. Maps, plural, as it turned out. Lydia had filed her own version of reality, an HOA improvement plan stamped with a community logo and absolutely zero city endorsements. She had convinced a friendly notary and her cousin who owned a drone to stitch together evidence that our fence was off by approximately 1 cul-de-sac. The map showed colorful overlays and property lines that seemed to curve in physically impossible ways. It was creative crafty at its finest. So, I made a phone call and hired a licensed surveyor, a non-nonsense professional named Margaret Chen, who had been surveying properties in the county for 25 years. 2 days later, Margaret and her team arrived with equipment that looked like something from a science fiction movie. Iron survey pins were located using metal detectors. GPS coordinates were recorded with precision instruments, and laser measurements were taken from multiple angles. The official report landed on my desk with Margaret's signature and professional seal. The 9 cottages sat entirely within my legal parcel boundaries, not close to the line, not ambiguously positioned, fully, completely, and undeniably on my property. The original survey pins from 1978 were exactly where they should have been, and Lydia's cottages were sitting approximately 40 foot inside my property line. I retained a real property attorney named James Whitmore, a man in his 60s who specialized in boundary disputes and had a reputation for being absolutely ruthless in court. James looked at the photos, reviewed Margaret's survey report, examined Lydia's fake map, and laughed once in a very professional manner. Then his expression turned serious, and he said, "Mr. Dorsey, this is one of the most blatant cases of encroachment I have seen in 30 years of practice. We are going to file immediately." He filed for a temporary restraining order, a quiet title action, and a lease pend on every single cottage within 48 hours. The lease pend was particularly important because it meant the cottages could not be sold or transferred without clearing the title issue, effectively freezing Lydia's entire operation. The county sheriff served legal papers while Lydia was in the middle of an Instagram live video explaining community micro-housing to her 2,000 followers. Her ring light reflected off the deputy's badge as he posted the official notice on her door. You could see her face go from confident influencer to pure panic in real time. The video is still online. I have watched it more times than I care to admit. The judge, who was spare in words, completely unsiling and clearly allergic to nonsense, reviewed the professional survey, the building permits, which did not exist, and Lydia's Phase 2 brochure with its clip artificial-looking seals. He immediately froze all HOA accounts connected to the cottages, assigned a court-appointed receiver to collect existing rents and hold them in trust, and barred the HOA from entering my property without explicit written permission. The order was swift and comprehensive. Lydia turned the color of skim milk as the judge read the terms aloud in court. Her hands were shaking as she gripped the table in front of her. Then she stood up and announced to the board members sitting behind her that a mere clerical ambiguity had occurred and everything would be resolved shortly. Her voice cracked on the word shortly. Then the city building department arrived for their inspection. The lead inspector was a woman named Sandra Rodriguez who had been working for the city for 15 years and had seen every shortcut and code violation imaginable. What she found at Birch Haven Phase 2 made her visibly angry. No permits had been filed. No inspections had been conducted. No licensed contractors were listed anywhere in Lydia's records. The electrical system was running off a shared meter that was somehow connected to the community clubhouse, creating a massive fire hazard and an illegal utility theft situation. The water was piggybacked from a park spigot using garden hoses buried underground and connected to PVC pipes that were never meant for portable water. The sewer line was more optimism than actual infrastructure, consisting of pipes that drained into what appeared to be a glorified ditch that ran toward the storm drain system. Sandra stood in the middle of the cul-de-sac with her inspection tablet and said to her assistant, "This is going to be a very long report." Code violation fines started stacking up like a game of Jenga, each one more expensive than the last. There were fines for unpermitted construction, illegal electrical work, unpermitted plumbing, improper sewer connections, zoning violations, and something called unlawful subdivision of property. The insurance company sent a letter with the phrase coverage void bolded 3 times in a row, informing the HOA that any claims related to the cottages would be denied and that the policy might be cancelled entirely if the situation was not remedied immediately. Court day was absolute theatre. The courtroom was packed with neighbors, board members, and local reporters who had caught wind of the story. Lydia brought a 3-ring binder labeled Truth in gold lettering and tabbed in lilac-colored dividers. She had prepared a presentation that included printed photographs, charts showing community benefit statistics, and testimonials from the cottage tenants about how much they loved living in Birch Haven Phase 2. I brought the survey team, the city building inspector Sandra Rodriguez, the court-appointed receiver, and a title historian named Dr. Patricia Hoffman, who had worked for the county recorder's office for 30 years and could trace property lines back to the original land grants. Dr. Hoffman produced the original 1978 property plat like it was a smoking gun drawn on graph paper. She walked the judge through the chain of title, pointing out every recorded deed, every survey, and every legal description of my property going back decades. She then showed how Lydia's map contradicted every single official document on file with the county. We played drone footage showing Lydia presiding over groundbreaking ceremonies, cutting ribbon with gold scissors on my grass, giving speeches about community vision while standing on my property, and directing construction crews with hand signals like she was conducting an orchestra. At one point in the video, you could clearly see Lydia pointing at my house in the background and saying, "We will deal with that later." My attorney, James, asked the judge to replay that section 3 times. Lydia's attorney, a young man who looked like he regretted every decision that led him to this courtroom, tried to argue that the community had acted in good faith and that the cottages provided affordable housing that benefited everyone. The judge cut him off mid-sentence and asked, "Did your client obtain a survey before construction?" The attorney shuffled papers and admitted that no professional survey had been conducted. The judge leaned back in his chair and said, "Counselor, good faith requires a minimum level of due diligence. Building 9 structures without verifying property boundaries does not meet that standard." The judge's written order hit the courtroom like thunder. Title was quieted entirely in my favor, with the cottages legally recognized as permanent fixtures on my land. The HOA, acting through its board of directors, was found liable for trespass, encroachment, and unlawful construction. All existing tenant lease agreements were converted into month-to-month ground leases payable directly to me at fair market rates set by the receiver. The HOA was required to fund complete code compliance work or face mandatory demolition, again running through me as the legal landowner, with all costs reimbursed plus a 20% administrative fee. The gallery of observers murmured with shock. Lydia tried to object on the grounds of neighborhood vibes. The judge raised one eyebrow in a look that could have sanded wood. Today, on the first business day of each and every month, 9 electronic deposits hit my bank account like polite little door knocks. The monthly rental income is enough to cover my mortgage, property taxes, and still have a considerable amount left over for savings. The city building department signed off on all code compliance after the receiver hired actual licensed tradespeople to fix Lydia's spaghetti wiring and plumbing nightmares. The electrical work alone cost $42,000. The plumbing required connecting to the actual city sewer system, which meant excavation, permits, inspections, and professional installation. The total remediation cost exceeded $90,000, all of which was billed back to the HOA with my 20% administrative fee added on top. The tenants themselves are genuinely lovely people. There is a retired teacher, a young couple who work remotely, a graduate student, and several other professionals who were just looking for affordable housing and had no idea they were living on disputed property. I waived all late fees in exchange for a community agreement not to use wind chimes. I also agreed to maintain the landscaping and handle exterior maintenance since the cottages are technically fixtures on my land now. I kept the keypad security gate, but now I control the access code. I change it monthly and provide it to the tenants and necessary service providers. As for Lydia Farnsworth, the consequences were severe and immediate. The judge took his time reading through the final order, making sure every word was clearly understood by everyone in the courtroom. She was removed as HOA president and barred from holding any board position for 10 years. The judge stated that her conduct demonstrated a pattern of overreach and disregard for property rights that made her unsuitable for any leadership role in the community. She was personally fined by the court in the amount of $15,000 for her role in the illegal construction project. She was ordered to complete $120 of community service building wheelchair accessibility ramps under direct city supervision. The judge specifically noted that the community service should remind her what proper permitted construction looks like. She was required to post a public written apology on the HOA website for 12 consecutive months with font size no smaller than 18 point, acknowledging her misrepresentation of property boundaries and illegal construction. The apology had to include specific admissions about the lack of surveys, permits, and proper authorization. She was placed on a 2-year probation period where any unauthorized improvement project, even something as small as a neighborhood flower bed, would trigger an automatic $5,000 contempt of court penalty. The judge also ordered her to pay my attorney fees, which totaled $38,000, and the surveyor costs, which added another $6,000. When the judge read the final terms, Lydia stood frozen in the courtroom, her perfectly manicured hands gripping the edge of the defendant's table until her knuckles turned white. Her face drained of all color, going from her usual confident glow to a pale gray that made her look ill. She clutched her lilac tab truth binder like a life preserver that had failed to save her, hugging it against her chest as if the weight of it could somehow anchor her to reality. Her attorney put a hand on her shoulder and whispered something, but she did not seem to hear him. She just stood there staring at the judge with an expression of complete and utter disbelief, as if she could not comprehend that the rule she had bent and ignored for so many years had finally bent back and broken her instead. Head.